I have to say something. Somebody, I don't know who, just recommended the Peter Kenny audiobooks.
Oh, they're so good. Was it me? Was it me
Yes.
like every 5 minutes?
And I listened to them and I recommended them to my little brother, and because he's a lazy reader of The Witcher, and
Yeah.
you have to read the book, they're so great, and just listen to the audiobooks instead. And I don't know, could have listened to the German audiobooks, but in German audiobooks there are not much that accents and all. It's very high German all the time. And in the English audiobooks, and Peter Kenny is very great.
So great.
You have these variations of accents, and it's just fun to hear. And you don't have that in German audiobooks. That's because I enjoy hearing the English audiobook by Peter Kenny. It's very great. Thank you for the recommendation.
So glad you liked it. I will never shut up about those audiobooks.
Please
Anytime
don't.
I see a thread on Reddit about like what audiobooks would you recommend, I'm like Peter Kenny. I'm like Read the Witcher by Peter Kenny. I feel like if you look at my Reddit comment history, it's just talking about people reading the audiobooks. Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a Global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from GoodMorhen, and I'll be your host as you, I, and our international Hanza accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny, Cirilla of Cintra, across the continent. Sorry about the audio quality. I'm actually out on a rooftop here in New York. It's been a very hot New York summer, so we're not at the sound booth today. So apologies for that. So for this episode and the next 3 episodes of Breakfast in Beauclair, we actually have a 9-month time jump between the episodes you just listened to and part 2 of season 3. I hope that you guys enjoy our new perspectives as we get to the end of the season. Thanks so much to our producer level patrons on Patreon: Katie, the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B, Charlotte from Eggenberg Lamorai, The Original Roach, Libby, John of Riblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Miriam of Temeria, Softy, and Lisa C. If you would like to learn more about supporting Breakfast in Beauclair, visit patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. As for this episode, Lucie from London and Pauline from Germany call in for Netflix's The Witcher episode 306, Everybody Has a Plan Till They Get Punched in the Face. Join us as we discuss loyalty and betrayal, notes on character motivations and direction, inevitable confrontations, and comparisons to Andrzej Sapkowski's Thanedd Coup in Time of Contempt. Without further ado, let's get to our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher, episode 306, Everybody Has a Plan Till They Get Punched in the Face. Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. My name is Alyssa, and today we're welcoming 2 members of our Hanza to the show. My first guest is a writer based in London who you'll recognize from episode 74, covering 104 of Magus, Malice, and Monstrous Mayhem from Netflix's Blood Origin. She's currently editing her first fantasy novel and working on her second about vampires. My second guest hails from Eastern Germany, where she recently started working as a resident in pediatrics after completing medical school last year. She enjoys reading fantasy and historical books, playing football, for my Americans, that's soccer, and playing the clarinet in a wind orchestra. Please welcome Lucie from London and Pauline from Germany. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hi.
Hello.
Hello, it's so lovely to have you both. Pauline, welcome to the show. Lucie, it's so nice to have you back. As we get started, Pauline, why don't you tell us how you got into The Witcher?
Well, I got in The Witcher in 2019 through The Witcher 3. When I first played it, I was completely hooked. I couldn't do something else. I don't know how I got to university in that year. So I had to know everything about the characters and the story, and there's so much you don't know if you don't read the books and you play Witcher 3. So I had to know everything, and I read spoilers online and such stuff. And so
Woman after my own heart. I love spoilers.
Or my boyfriend got me the books over the next years, and I first read the main 5 books, and I didn't know much more because the short stories were missing. But then I read the short stories, and for the last years I read the whole books twice. I tried Witcher 1 but
Yeah.
when you first played Witcher 3, it's And I played Witcher 2 halfway through, I think, and then I didn't want it anymore. But when I read it, the whole book series, I just thought, how did I not see these books before? Because it's exactly the story I like to read. And I'm a big Harry Potter fan, Lord of the Rings, such things. And I never heard of The Witcher before. I don't know when it was translated to German, but I didn't know it before, and it's so great.
Yeah.
It's one of the best book series I ever read.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you fell in love with it. What was one of the moments in The Witcher 3 that like really got you hooked?
I really like mutants.
Okay.
So I really like magic and stuff, and when things change, when people change, and so Geralt is like my thing. And so Geralt is in the games and also in the books, it's like this anti-hero who always wants to do good, but it not always get his way. And so I don't know, it's just this whole world, this fantasy world I fell in love with. I think it's the whole thing, and Geralt in particular, and Ciri, of course, because Ciri is way overpowered in The Witcher 3, but she's very cool.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I'm so excited to have your insight into the show as you're just a fantasy lover in general. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about this episode. Lucie, it's been a while since we've last had you on the show, but so nice to have you back. What's been going on with you? Tell us a little bit about the books you've been working on and what's new.
Yeah, the books. I am on round 3 of editing the first one, which is mostly rewriting at the moment. So that's exciting / daunting. And then I have started writing another one. Let's call them contemporary vampires, which I'm enjoying. You know, it's very different kind of brain editing versus writing a story for the first time, which is why I kind of have to do both, because I think writing is a lot more fun than editing.
Yeah.
So when we last spoke, I think was like early 2023. And last summer, I finished reading the Witcher books. I actually read the last one when I was in Berlin for some reason. I always read them when I'm in Europe, like in continental Europe. So I have like photos of me and The Witcher in like Berlin, Paris, like various places in France. It became a thing for me to get my selfie with one of the novels in continental Europe.
I love that. I have acquired various translations of The Witcher that I can't read. And I feel like I want to continue doing that as I go through Europe. But I think I have an Italian version, a French version, and I might as well just keep going.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anything that you could tease us with about either book?
So the one I'm editing at the moment, it's sort of a portal fantasy, but it's about fantasy writers. So it's kind of some of it is a commentary on fantasy, which is also how I got to The Witcher, because my sister was watching it and she recommended it as like a slightly typical, like medieval high fantasy story.
Amazing. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more about your book and then maybe reading it in the future. You're going to have to keep us updated.
Yes.
And so today we'll continue our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher Season 3 with episode 306, Everybody Has a Plan Till They Get Punched in the Face, in which betrayal and bloodshed rock the conclave when the hunt for Ciri comes to a head. As sides are chosen and enemies unmasked, nothing will ever be the same. Here's a quick synopsis of the episode from future Alyssa.
In episode 306, Everybody Has a Plan Till They Get Punched in the Face, Yennefer attempts to use a locator spell on Tissa's jewelry, believing her to be in danger. Geralt follows the sound of shouts and scuffles in the hallways and is ambushed by Dijkstra. Meanwhile, Radovid and Jaskier fall out when Radovid goes hunting for Ciri, but the princess's bed is empty and Yennefer's protective enchantments have worn off. Following the ball, Redania and their allies arrest a number of mages suspected to be traitors to Nilfgaard, Istredd and Vilgefortz among them. Tissaia is brought before Philippa Dijkstra and the mages of the north. She breaks the binding spell holding back the traitors, and the mages start attacking each other. Geralt confronts Dijkstra, breaking the spymaster's arms and legs. Elsewhere, Lydia attacks Yennefer, but Triss saves her. While Dijkstra thinks Redanian reinforcements are coming, it's actually the Scoia'tael, who are here to support Vilgefortz and Nilfgaard by sacking and burning Aretuza. Tissaia suggests to Vilgefortz that they can take Redania together when Vilgefortz reveals his betrayal. He admits to framing Stregobor for his kidnappings and experiments, then lets in the Scoia'tael and Nilfgaard, whose forces are led by Francesca, Cahir, Fringilla, and Filavandrel.
Tisea and the mages make a stand. She hurls a spell at Francesca, which instead vaporizes Filavandrel. In the fray, Fringilla kills her uncle Artorius. Angry and heartbroken, Francesca uses telekinesis to lock all of the doors to the courtyard and collapses the Ring of Fire into the battle. Ciri makes her way to Aretuza, reuniting with Yennefer on the path. Rince finds them, but the Witcher girl cuts off all of his fingers when he attacks. With a little deceit, Yennefer tosses Geralt's sword to him, and he shockingly beheads Rince from behind. Back in Aretuza, the battle rages on. Tisea calls upon Alzur's Thunder, a spell of last resort. Yennefer leaves Geralt and Ciri to return to her side. Alzur's Thunder kills mages, Scoia'tael, and Nilfgaardians indiscriminately. As Tisea loses power, Alzur's Thunder ends. The remaining mages on both sides prepare to have a final stand, but Stregobor stands between them and prepares to annihilate the elves with fire magic. Yennefer rescues Tisea. Istrid goes hunting for the Book of Monoliths alone, but he's found by Vilgefortz, who throws the scholar through a portal to an unknown destination. Cahir finds Geralt and Ciri on their escape. Ciri plans to kill him, but he lays down his arms. He reveals that he's lost faith in Nilfgaard and begs Ciri for forgiveness and to kill him herself. She can't bring herself to do so. The Scoia'tael interrupt, and Cahir runs to fight them. Geralt and Ciri find a rowboat, but before they can drag it out to the water to escape, Geralt senses something nearby and finds Vilgefortz waiting for him. They fight one-on-one at the entrance to Tor Lara. Unexpectedly, Vilgefortz defeats Geralt with the help of his magical staff. In the fight, Geralt's sword shatters, and Vilgefortz leaves the Witcher for dead. Ciri climbs Tor Lara to escape him. The mage tries to coax her down by promising her power, control, and strength. At the heart of the tower, words appear across the monolith, and Ciri releases a burst of energy that demolishes the tower instantly. Triss finds Geralt dying on the shore. Francesca and Fringilla can't locate Cahir or the Scoia'tael scouts. The remaining mages overlook the ruins of Aretuza as Tor Lara crumbles into the sea.
So now that we've gotten a synopsis from future Alyssa, I would love to hear both of your thoughts on the episode. It is very interesting because listeners aren't going to feel this because there's just going to be 2 weeks between episode 305, which was just released 2 weeks ago, and this episode 306. But in real time, there's actually about 9 months between the last 2 episodes. We've recorded part 1, the first 5 episodes, right around the time the series came out. And we are currently in April 2024, recording this episode, episode 306. So I'm looking forward to coming to these discussions with very different perspective now that we've had all this time and we're returning to the show after all these months. That being said, how did you guys feel about this episode, both at the time it was released and then more recently?
I think it was quite good. I remember when I first saw it, I was so... My favorite scene is, of course, the fight between Vilgefortz and Geralt. It's so a significant scene in the books where you're used to that Geralt always wins, and then you have this fight, and it's just devastating to read. It was devastating to watch how he just loses and get punched in the face. No pun intended. That was my favorite scene, and the episode is quite washed and quite chaotic, but so it's the scene in the books, so I think it's okay, but I think the episode's quite fine.
Yeah. Lucie, any thoughts on the episode?
I was very excited to watch the fight as well between Geralt and Vilgefortz, and same, it's my favorite scene in it. I can't quite remember how I felt about it 9 months ago. I think I rewatched it this week to get back into it. And it dragged a bit. I sort of fast forwarded through some of the parts on my second rewatch.
Was there anything specific that you skipped over or anything that held your attention when you stopped to watch?
I think a lot of the early fights, it felt quite long, but at the same time, it's a bit off. It's this weird thing that there's a scene which feels a bit filler, and then something actually really important happens in it, but you barely have time to sit with it, and then you're on to the next already. So yeah, I mean, I was thinking about it, and you've got so many deaths of characters who've been with us for so long, and you barely have time to register some of them.
Right. this episode and just the idea of the Thanedd coup is something that, you know, we've been looking forward to seeing on screen for years. It's one of the biggest events on the continent. I remember watching it the very first time. This was, I think I got to see it, if I remember correctly, before everybody else did as like a press perk. I remember the things that shocked me in this episode. Well, I fast forwarded through some of it at the time because watching gore and violence stresses me out. So also, if it gets a little gory, I'll like hit, I'll have a tendency to hit that skip 15-second button. So I think the very first time I like, for example, missed Filavandrel getting absolutely demolished and then had to go back and find out how like Francesca got full carried and had to go back and rewatch that scene because I was like, wait, what happened? So that was one thing. Rince's death, I was not expecting that on a first watch. And I just had a full like, wait, what? Because again, as book readers, without going into spoilers for later books, like Rince's death doesn't happen in this way at this time at all. And he's a character that I was expecting to have for a little longer and I thought would be a threat for longer.
Yeah.
So I wasn't expecting that at all. But there's, of course, like a number of highlights in this episode as well. Maesh Jadu as Vilgefortz and Mayanna Buring as Tissaia. I think they did amazingly with material that they had. They're such strong actors, and both of you called out the fight between Geralt and Vilgefortz, which I thought was, you know, wonderfully done. I think it could have had a little bit more hope to it at the start. I think that in order to have us believe that Geralt stood a chance before everything just kind of went, that Vilgefortz is fighting with the magical staff and having it transfer from hand to hand, and that was a pretty neat detail for him.
Do you think that you felt there was limited hope in it because you kind of already know how it's going to end, right? As book readers, I felt we went into it with spoilers in a way. Or like I would be curious basically to hear how someone who had no idea of how this was going to play out felt about it.
Yeah, I do think that's a valid point. Yeah, I mean, there was one moment where Vilgefortz says to Geralt, like, I'm tired of holding back. But I feel like those could have been the fight sequences on either side of that fight probably could have been a lot different. So like evenly balanced, maybe like Vilgefortz starts like losing or Geralt catches him off guard in one, like in a step or something like that. And then it becomes completely overpowered. I think there could have been a much stronger difference in choreography on both sides of that fight in order to make that loss so much more dramatic. But I do love the way that it was done. Like, I was going back and reading the comments that were in the Hanza Discord a couple of months ago when the series came out. And I think everybody was like, I wanted Geralt to be even more downtrodden and injured. Because Henry Cavill still looks like Henry Cavill. And I think people wanted, you know, like him to be absolutely splayed and like completely broken. So I don't know. I think that it was a really solid scene. I think it could have been teased out like a little bit more because this was the shortest episode of the season by about like 10 to 15 minutes. So it was only 48 minutes long, I believe, with credits as well. So yeah.
For me, one of the frustrating thing about that duel scene with the sword, like, you know, Vilgefortz breaks Geralt's sword, which should be a massive moment, right? Especially because you've had the sword motive from the beginning. Like he gives it to Yen as a way to give her a way to fight, and then the quite fantastic way, like she throws it back to him to kill Rinth, and then you have like that sword journey in the episode, which completes with it completely shattering, which for me should be it's a really big moment, right? And you don't stay with it. The comparison I was thinking about was in the Falcon and Winter Soldier series. You have a moment where you have a scene at the end of an episode where you see blood on Captain America's shield. And I think that it's the first time you do. And it's like such a strong image to leave you with. And I think they could have done something like that with Geralt's sword. I just thought there was a missed opportunity on that.
Yeah. I mean, that would be like a beautiful lingering shot, either of the sword on its own or even his reaction to it breaking. Because you're right, it is such a strong symbol for his journey from episode 1 with Renfrey's brooch all the way to this current episode. And
really what we come to know by the end of the season, like the loss of his neutrality and him as a Witcher and everything that he's built himself up to be up until this point of the series. Pauline, any thoughts?
No, I think it's very intelligent what you say. I enjoy listening. You talked a little bit about Rience's death. I remember when I watched it the first time, I just thought, what the fuck? Sorry, I don't know if we can curse. But
yeah, you're fine.
I think he just got away too easy. So it's in the books, without spoiling, it's just a significant moment. So when Ciri snaps his fingers, that's a nice touch. But again, no spoilers. If I remember correctly, in the Tower of Smallers. But then Geralt just appears out of nowhere and kills him, and a little bit Deus Ex Machina. He's just there and kills him, and there goes Rience. So I got away too easy, I think.
Yeah, I think that would be my critique of his arc, in that I understand that they probably killed him off for multiple reasons. One, to like eventually focus more on Vilgefortz, which is probably where we're headed for the next few seasons. But I feel like there's been so much interest and build-up for Rience for the last 2 seasons. Obviously, he had a big arc with Yennefer when it was a different actor, and then they kind of sidelined him a little bit, but he's kind of been lingering over the group since episode 1 of this season. And they've been hunting for him, and then he just kind of like appears, and he has maybe like all of 3 minutes, and then he's gone. And it didn't feel really satisfying, I think, because maybe Lucie, you have a better idea as a writer of like how you might handle this. But I feel like Rience, he's obviously hunting Ciri, and there is something satisfying about her being the one to confront him, but obviously doesn't have the same weight as the confrontation between Ciri and Cahir, which we'll talk about later. And so I don't know if there's any satisfaction as a viewer in watching Geralt just kind of behead him quite quickly. Like, they found him, they killed him, but there's still kind of like that overhead mystery. And they still don't know at the time, like, who his benefactor is. And I don't know, it just felt very unsatisfying to watch that happen so fast.
Yeah, I agree. And it almost feels like the writers felt that they needed to kill him off. And then because they kill him, and then immediately you've got that quite emotional theme. You know, Yennefer goes to Arethusa, right? Like, they are split. They just came back together. They're together on screen for like very little time. And then they split again. So you've got this, and I don't think any of it has time to land properly. And also because Rience comes after, at that point, Philivandrel has died. Lydia has possibly died. Like, you've had all these, Fringula's uncle, whose name I can't remember.
Artorias, yeah.
Yeah, like, you know, he's like one in a series. So I feel as well that might slightly reduce the impact of it. And I mean, the main reason why I remember it is because, like, you have that moment where he's a bit of a duck, right? Like, he keeps walking even though he's been beheaded, and then falls down. I think I almost remember it because of the shock of it more than because it's a big moment in the story.
Yeah, I think this is another case where I would be interested to talk to a non-book reader about whether or not that was expected, how it landed. I will have a non-book reader on at the very end of the season, so I will ask about that. Or at least since the last time we spoke, they haven't read books.
Okay.
So maybe they still haven't. I'm banking on it, Rob. So yeah, so I'll see if I can get some perspective there. Before we dive into the discussion questions, as far as Easter eggs go, Alzur's Thunder, which is what Tissaia uses on the Conclave in the middle of the fight, it's mentioned by Triss and Yennefer in Lady of the Lake, and it's also a Gwent card. So we do get to see it, the Netflix version of that here, in which it's a spell that causes lightning on anyone she looks at. And yeah, that's one little tidbit.
Do I remember correctly? I just skimmed the chapter very shortly before we met. But I think in the books, she also uses a thing like that. I think when it's very in the end of the chapter where they are in Garsting, she also throws Lightning
Yeah.
on the onto the enemies, I think, but it's not named also thunder. That's right.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good point. It's not thunder as a sound and lightning is the actual. I wonder why it's called thunder.
Yeah, I
And
thought
it's
exactly that when Pauline, when you said lightning, I was like, yeah, actually, that's what it
actually
is.
that's the thing. Maybe it's a translation difference, but significantly more accurate. Yeah, that's very funny. I've never really given that any thought. I'm just gonna sit with that for a moment.
I don't know how it's translated into in German. I didn't read The Lady of the Lake recently, but if I read it again, I can look if it's also called thunder in German.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Adventures and translations, just par for the course for Breakfast and Beauclair, I feel like. Now that we've kind of spoken about some of our overall thoughts and our standout moments of the episode, as we get into our discussion, what themes would you say are explored in this episode and how are they represented throughout the narrative, dialogue, visual imagery, and even the title of this one, Everybody Has a Plan Till They Get Punched in the Face?
I think that's quite it. The title of the episode is Everybody Has a Plan, and then this plan goes to shit. So, because something happened they didn't expect, and they have to act on it, and at the end of the episode, everything didn't go as they planned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a massive failure of intelligence all around, right? There's something slightly disappointing in Dijkstra and Philippa being blindsided like that, because I think I have in my head they are like much better spies than they turn out to be.
When I think about the themes that are shown in this episode, of course, we have kind of the main trio. They have such a strong focus on family. And when we're looking at it, it's a lot of kind of like longing looks. And like anytime we see them together, maybe it's because they're outside and the daylight is coming out, but it's always light whenever we see them. When we cut back to the chaos inside Aretuza, it is red, it is bloody, there's fire, the magic effects that they used. I think somebody online said it was very much like Harry Potter magic, where it kind of like looks, you can see it happening, which does kind of like, make sense for like production. But I wonder if we could have seen other types of magic.
For me, a lot of the magic is frustrating because it's non-specific, right?
Yeah.
Like they bring down that big fire ring, which just hurts and kills people indiscriminately. Then the thunder/lightning does the same again.
Right.
So it's just like everyone kills like everyone, including Vera.
Yeah.
There's something very desperate in it on both sides, right? Whether it's the elves or Tithea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and matters more than means or that people.
Yeah, I think that's another theme that comes up. It's like that desperation. And you see that a lot whenever we look at shots of Tithea specifically. It's kind of like very much focused on her face as things are happening kind of in the background. And we follow her as she's kind of driven to the point of madness and she calls upon that act of last resort. But we see how she kind of reaches that point over the course of the episode. At the beginning, she comes into that holding room strong and determined and curt. And then as she devolves and sees the horror that's happening, we start to focus on kind of like her and her inner world and how this experience is kind of like shaping her resignation before she kind of unleashes hell on everybody.
Yeah.
And we start to see that. I think the first time we really zoom in on her face is when the betrayal by Vilgefortz happens. She goes chasing him to say like, hey, we can stop all of this. We can overcome the Redanians. And he's like, that's not part of the plan, by the way. I never loved you. Goodbye. And you kind of see the whole shot zero in on her world coming down before the Scoia'tael enter. But yeah, and then again, like everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face. Like same thing on the Nilfgaardian and the Scoia'tael side. Like they had a plan. They have Dimeridium tipped arrows. They expect to come in and really conquer Aretuza. And then Filavandrel gets killed and it changes the whole thing for Francesca because suddenly she's lost everything. And so again, kind of that callback to Carrie and to the horror of her being just covered in blood as she's making all of these desperate attempts to, and brings down that ring of fire. I think the episode gets darker. Thank God we could see stuff in it. And it's not like one of those pitch black episodes. So I do appreciate that, like, they found narrative ways to ensure that we can still watch what's happening.
Yeah.
So whether it's like the lightning or the fire, we can see it.
When we talk about the fighting on Thanedd, I was quite surprised how many sorcerers got killed, because I think sorcerers are very, very powerful and they're just as Goya-tail. Yes, of course, the lithium-tipped arrows, but that's it. On the Scourger side, there are just 2 sorcerers, if I remember correctly, Francesca and Fringilla.
Yeah.
Against, I don't know, 20, 30 sorcerers, and the sorceresses just get killed. I thought the sorcerers were more powerful.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that a little bit more later when we talk about the changes from the books to the show. I don't often try to compare these because I think at a certain point they need to stand alone, but I think that kind of question of power is also very different in the books and probably worth exploring. But as we continue, the episode features numerous instances of power struggles and betrayal. Which characters do you think are like the most affected by these? And how do they navigate the alliances and rivalries throughout the episode and through all this fighting?
I think it's Tisea. You also spoke about it when Vilgefortz betrayed her. First, when she got into the room and saw the lot of sorcerers being captured, she wanted to help them and did her thing. And then later she got betrayed by Vilgefortz, and then she was quite devastated but thought, well, no, I have to do it alone. When the Vilgefortz doesn't want to help me, she does it alone, and then the other sorcerers come and help her. After the betrayal, I think she's quite devastated, and because her whole world is breaking down, everything she knows, everyone she loves is dead or dying, and she just doesn't know what to do but fight on and do the impossible thing. And yeah, I think she's quite devastated in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Tisea's betrayal, but you also see everyone coming together around her, right? Like whether it's Yen, Triss, like they're really rallying around her. And I think you mentioned before the theme of family, and a lot of it is chosen family. And it really comes together around it. And in the way when you have that dialogue between Yen and Ciri, and it's very clear, right, that the way they're talking, like Yennefer is talking about Tisea is a way kind of like Ciri is talking about Yen. Like you have this kind of, I don't know, matriarchal line almost of, which isn't women mages mentoring each other and helping each other grow.
In regards to power struggles and betrayal, it's interesting because the script is flipped a couple of times throughout the episode, right? We start off and Dijkstra and Philippa are very much in control of the room. They have all the mages that they've pulled from their beds, including Vilgefortz, Istrid, and an entire room of others. Geralt gets caught up in it, but he's kind of, passive in the corner. And then Tisea comes and changes everything. So she releases all the mages, fighting breaks out, and then suddenly it's mages on mages. Then Vilgefortz lets in the Scoia'tael, which was something that nobody accounted for, and suddenly it's mages against Scoia'tael and Nilfgaard. It's almost like every time the threat is like a new other or new outsider, the alliances shift based on necessity. And the instigating event for each of those is a betrayal. So like you have the quote unquote betrayal of Redania against everybody else, and then Tisea's betrayal of the North in favor of Vilgefortz. That's really what sets her off when one of the Redanian soldiers punches Vilgefortz in the face. And then when he lets in the Scoia'tael, that's another factor that comes into it. I do think Tisea was the one who was most affected. I would agree with both of you that she hadn't expected any of this, and she didn't know what the consequences of her involvement would ultimately result in the downfall and the destruction of Aretuza, which is her home, which she loves so much. It's almost like watching them do the best with the information that they have at the time, which is, again, like comes back to the title of the episode, that they're all executing a plan and then everything goes to absolute shit. I think the only people who were immediately unaffected by the betrayals that are happening that are later going to affect the continent are really, Geralt, Ciri, and Yennefer. And how would you guys say the actions and decisions of this main trio in this episode reflect their growth and development throughout the series?
It's difficult because it's different in the books where Yennefer is maybe captured. You don't know this in the books. Geralt doesn't know where she is. He always asks, but doesn't get an answer. And in the show, it's that Yennefer flees. I don't know if that's quite her character. Maybe she thought just flee and find Ciri and get out of this shit. But I don't know. And then Ciri wanted to find Yennefer, and Geralt also flees, and they are together, and then they are not. And I don't know.
For me, she really flees to find Ciri, which obviously everyone is after Ciri, right? And I think a lot of people think she's actually in Aretusa itself, because there's a moment, I think, where one of the Scoia'tael, or maybe it's Wilga, I mean, I can't remember who, but they say, to me, it was something to the effect, in my memory at least, it was the effect of like, find the girl. And then Geralt in the corner at the beginning slightly annoyed me. Was that just do something? I don't know.
Just chilling.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, that's also not dissimilar from what happened in the books, where he's just kind of vibing and observing for a while.
And from what I remember of the book, and please correct me, he happens upon the coup because he needs to pee.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I love, because it's like so random. And I love, it's one of the things I really like in Sapkowski's book, right? It's like how random quite a lot of decisions are. And I kind of would have liked to see that, because I think it's kind of funny. But I also understand why, you can't do a one-off-one. And what you said about everything standing for itself, I agree. But I'm not sure this is the right time to talk about it. But
That's
I'm
okay.
really frustrated with the way Yen leaves Ciri and Geralt. But her presence back in Aretusa is almost pointless. Like, when you look at those scenes, the same would happen whether or not she's there, right? Because she's in that room and Stregobor arrives and he does the fire magic and he's like, go. And she hasn't really done anything. Like, she's barely done any spell. And then she goes to Tisea and she arrives when Tisea is already, like, she just catches her, which is a really nice scene. But it's also, I don't know, I think that there's a whole build up to her leaving Geralt and Ciri and like, whatever, it's not, we'll always find each other, but it's kind of like that vibe. And she goes, and then like, it's a bit of a whole lot of nothing.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely one of those cases where you also need to, if you've written a reason for her to be with Ciri and Geralt, you also need to write a reason for her to not be with Ciri and Geralt by the time Vilgefortz comes back.
Yeah, that scene where the three of them are together immediately after Rhaenys' death, the way it's filmed, I felt was quite weird, because most of the time you have Ciri and Yennefer, and then you have a lot of like, kind of not quite zoomed in, but like on Geralt, and it's like they're together as a family, but they're also not. And obviously it's meant to be the last time we're going to see them together for like, I mean, depending how much they respect the book, it could be the last time we see them in a while.
Yeah. It very much gave the impression of just like, were they there on different days?
Yes, I agree.
He just had like a little tennis ball on a stick. Just like, pretend Henry Cavill is here.
Yeah, that was a bit weird. Because again, it should be like this very emotional moment.
Right.
And then, I mean, the discussion, because motherhood has been such an important thing with Yennefer, like that discussion with Ciri and going back to Tisea, and Ciri immediately gets it.
Yeah.
And it's also something about how good a teacher I think Yennefer has been, because Ciri knows about that thunder.
I think that scene in particular is reflective of their new dynamics. Obviously, a lot of this season has been rebuilding the relationship between Yennefer and Geralt and Yennefer and Ciri based on all the stuff that happened in the last season, like Volithmere, which we're just going to glaze over. And I did read in a thread last night, so I'm glad it was reminded for me that season 2 was written before season 1 had come out, which makes a lot of sense, I feel like, for the return to the books in season 3, because they didn't know the backlash that would happen after season 2. But I think when we come back again to the actions and decisions of this trio, Geralt is fighting for his family. He's fighting to keep everybody together. He doesn't give two shits about what's going on in Thanedd. They're seeing that smoke from a distance. He just got out of there and he's like, let's go. Let's get off this island. Let's be safe. There's no need to come back to this. As you said, Yennefer's entire journey has been through her parenting by Tissaia and then also finding a family with Geralt and Ciri. And I think it's very much that pull between new and old. She had previously spoken to Vilgefortz in the last episode or the episode before about feeling pleased with who Tissaia is now. Tissaia is softer. I like who Tissaia is now that she's with you. And I think it's good for her. But it's kind of that questioning of like new and old loyalty. Obviously, she wants to keep Ciri safe, but I think one of the things that the Netflix series has done a much better job with than the books really is making that connection between Tissaia and Yennefer. And that's something that between Anya Chalotra and Mayanna Buring, I think they've done an incredible job at building that relationship so we feel invested in it as viewers. And so even though Ciri and Yennefer have never really had that discussion about Tissaia specifically, or maybe they did and I just missed it. It is nice to see the acceptance and understanding between them that they've struggled with all season. Obviously, Yennefer's been teaching Ciri about magic. Ciri ran away from Yennefer after they had a falling out in episode 2. But it's nice to see them have like a holistic understanding and it feels like their relationship feels a little closer. Whether or not that was earned, I think is up for debate. But I do like the scene between them and I think it does show growth for both characters. Speaking of Ciri and being left on that mountaintop, a bit later in the episode, we find Cahir, well, Cahir finds Ciri, I suppose, and finally meets her face to face since the fall of Cintra. So it's been a number of years since then. Cahir has turned into a specter in her mind and a representation of everything that she's lost from Cintra, her grandmother, and her title, everything. But there's a lot of change in both of them that we don't necessarily expect. What would you say Ciri and Cahir's confrontation reveals about both of their inner struggles and their motivations?
I think for Ciri it's quite similar in the books, but so for Ciri it is Cahir who stands for the destruction of Cintra, for the destroying of her world, what she knows, what she did know her whole childhood. And that's what she's afraid of this memory, I think. And she has to conquer this memory or fight against this memory. And Cahir is the personification of that. And so she's afraid. And I think she's afraid that she's afraid of him. And that's because she wants to fight him, to fight her own afraidness. Fear.
Yes.
Fear.
There's a moment right before where Ciri and Geralt have a whole discussion about killing people, right? I didn't make, Did I make that up or is that real?
Just throughout everything. I feel like they have that discussion every once in a while over the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, and I think, the fact that I don't think she would have gone through with it. Like, even if the other Scoia'tael hadn't arrived, I don't think she would have gone through with it because I think, she... Like, it doesn't mean that, she's not angry at him or she doesn't, but I felt they've had those discussions and that training and this thing about, you don't necessarily kill people because you kill people because there's a purpose to it, right? It's not a gratuitous killing. I think Cahir being insistent that she kills him is quite an awful thing to do to a teenager. And to me, there's still that, like, it might not be religious fervor, but there's something to that in it, right? Of like being like cleansed by death, which I don't know. In his mind, this is clearly the right thing to do, right? To get forgiveness and whatnot. But I'm not sure how much he thought it through.
Yeah, oh no, not at all. Yeah.
It very much feels like quite an awful thing to do, right? When he's putting like the tip of the blade against his neck.
Yep.
I was like, what are you doing? Like, it felt very stressful to her. Like, he's not giving her the time and space to think about it, right? It's kind of like,
I mean, there's urgent things that seem to be happening.
Well, there are. That's fair. Like, there's a coup and there's stuff falling and whatnot. But it's still making it about himself rather than like really making it about her like journey and like what she thinks and whatnot, right? Like, so that's how I felt about it. That it was still a very selfish act in a way for me.
Yes, I think you phrased it better than I could. But it's so interesting to understand how their character journeys have brought them to this specific moment in such a different way. Because we've spent the last few seasons with Ciri, and she is hunting for revenge. She has an innate desire to avenge her family, to avenge Cintra. And as you said, Pauline, like, Cahir is really the personification of a lot of the things that she's lost in that time. And so she's not as helpless as she was at the fall of Cintra. She has Witcher training. She can fight. She can defend herself, and she can be the aggressor in a way that she has never been before. Of course, it's interesting to see Geralt step aside and for him to understand that she is going to do whatever she does in this moment. And as her mentor and as her father figure, what's going to play out is going to play out. But I think to some extent, even Geralt believes that she's not going to go through with it. So he must feel comfortable stepping aside. But maybe it's teenage arrogance, maybe it's anger, that she believes she's prepared to go in and kill this man when she's never killed anybody before. I think Cahir, as you said, kind of selfishly turns the tables and makes it almost, yes, he does make it about himself, but it is one of those things where, like, by him asking for forgiveness, he gives all of the power to her for her to forgive him or to actually follow through with her revenge. It is a very big monologue that he gives, and he's just like, forgive me, but also here's your blade and you can do with me as you wish. I give my life to you. I can't undo what's been done, but you can kill me. And it feels like a bit of a cop-out. Like you said, Lucie, it doesn't feel like he's thought this through, but I feel like if he did die here, there would be no satisfaction for either character. Because he's just like, I'm going to escape all of my guilt and all of the trauma that I have caused. Bye. It feels like the coward's way out for him to let Ciri kill him.
It's not justice.
Yes. Yeah. And I think for Ciri, it's like, there's obviously something that stops her. And whether it's Cahir's, his appearance or his surrender in general, like, she can't follow through with it. And I think that is kind of a breaking moment for her, where the anger that she feels and the desperation that she feels is not greater than the desire to actually kill him and to follow through. There's obviously, like, his death isn't going to bring anybody back. His death won't restore Cintra. It won't restore her title. It won't bring back her grandmother. And I think she knows that, to some extent. Like, what is killing this man on the edge of a cliff really going to change about her situation? Particularly when there's, again, more urgent things that happen. I think I would have liked to see this scene play out slightly longer. I think it would have been more powerful for them to just leave him without the interference of the Scoia'tael. So I don't think that was necessary. It would have been more powerful for her to just walk away.
I agree. Could we go back to what you mentioned about Geralt? Because I think earlier we talked about him being an observer in that big room with Dijkstra and
just
Philippa.
Likes to sit and watch stuff. Like,
he spends his time. So he does that. Then he does that when there's Ciri and Cahir. After doing that, when like Ciri and Yennefer are saying their goodbyes, like barely object to Yennefer going back. I think Ciri is like, oh, she has to go. And she's like, yeah, okay then.
Yeah.
He just spends a lot of this episode up until the fight with Vilgefortz just looking at what's going on, basically.
know. I mean, can he get more dad than that? Just like
Right.
watching things that are happening and being like, okay, but I just want to get out of here. So I'm just going to wait for you guys to be finished. And then I'll be like, by the way, can we leave? Can we leave? Can we leave?
But it's almost like, I don't know, to some extent, it feels like the writer don't really know what to do with their main character,
Yeah.
which is really weird because, yeah, just really weird.
I think that is a fair critique. I will give them, some benefit of the doubt. And again, like, I think in The Witcher, like a lot of things just kind of happen
Mhm.
to these characters. And I think particularly in this scene, even in the books, it's rare sometimes for Geralt to take a certain level of initiative. I think there are obviously things he does even in the books where like he fights for Dania and like he continues going, but like we'll talk about the books in a bit. But yeah, I think it's a little strange for him to be so passive. I'm trying to think of like how I would fix it. I suppose if he had been, I think, a little more assertive and like, we need to leave, we need to leave, we need to leave, maybe that would help. But I don't know. I wonder if it was scheduling.
Yeah, it could have been. But at the same time, I don't know if I would have wanted that dialogue between Ciri and Yennefer to become a three-way conversation because I think it's also quite nice to have that moment between Yennefer and Ciri and like the presence of Tisea in it.
Yeah. Like, I don't know if that could have been fixed by Geralt being like, I'm going to get a boat. See you guys a bit. Like, I don't know if that would have fixed it, but yeah, I do think that's a fair critique. I think, again, when I was catching myself up on the sentiment, both in the Hanza Discord and kind of in the online forums, it seemed that a lot of people weren't sure about the decision to kind of continually pull away the main characters from the brunt of the action. A lot of the critique was just like, were people understanding that obviously Ciri in the books like just kind of gets out of Thanedd unscathed? So having a reason for her not to be within the fighting is probably, safest. So you don't have to kind of write her out of it. I suppose the same thing with Yennefer and Geralt. But it sounds like it could have been a stronger narrative or, again, more satisfying for a lot of audience members if they weren't so divorced from the primary action for most of the episode. So we've kind of danced around the books the entire conversation, but I'd love to, talk about them here. You guys know that on the podcast, I try not to make too many direct comparisons to the books because I do think that we should be able to talk about the Netflix show on its own because there's only so much to say when it's just like, this is exactly the same, this is very different, and I don't want the podcast to only be about that. However, the Thanedd coup is, again, something that happens directly in the books, and there are moments within the episode that are pretty on par to what happened in the books, so I'm comfortable opening up the discussion here. But as fans of both the books and the Netflix series, how do you guys think this episode compares to its source material in Time of Contempt? What changes or adaptations were made? How do they affect the narrative? What do you think was successful? Or is there anything that you think was overlooked or misrepresented or surprised you?
I think a big change was in the books. Ciri is on Thanedd, this ominous where she prophesies in Garsting and then hell breaks loose. And then she has to get out of Garsting, out of Thanedd, and then there's Skirtel and Rians and Cahir and then the Tolawa.
Yeah.
And there's a little, she's on the center of action, and I think then you can understand as reader why she has to get out of there because she's there. And in the series, she's not on Thanedd, she's not on Garsting, she's in this hut and went towards Garsting to find Yennefer and Geralt. And they said, you must go away, you have to get you off the island. But I think as fear, you might think, why? There's no danger, she's not on the island. I don't know if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But that's a big change, I think. And then what I noticed, I think it's quite different in the show because we saw more of Cahir in the show than in the books, and you have more connection with him than in the books. But in the books, I think it's the first time you see who Cahir is. So for Ciri, it's this black rider and with the helmet and the wings and everything. And then she fights him and he loses his helmet. And then she sees, oh, it's just a young man. And I think in the books, that's the situation where Ciri says, it's not this ghost, not this demon. It's just the human and I can't kill him.
Yeah.
And that's quite different because you know Cahir better, and he's not this mystery figure in the nightmares of Ciri, but a real person. And I think not that terrifying for Ciri in the show than it is in the books.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I read it nearly 2 years ago, but in my memory, when Vilgeforth and Geralt fight, there's an illusion.
Uh-huh.
Right? Is that correct?
I think so. I'm actually trying to remember myself.
I felt that there's an illusion, and then it turns out that it's like they're on crumbling ground or something.
Right.
Which, I mean, it might not sound like it, but kind of like really struck me at the time. It was one of those things where I was like, oh, they can do something really cool with that by like bringing it to screen. They do not bring it to screen. So yeah, I think that was one of the things I was expecting to see and didn't. But I also think that cave-like structure, like in which the fight happens going onto the beach, like that also works as a setting, you know, considering like the way they've done the story.
Yeah, the books are interesting because for the majority of Thanedd, I think save a specific scene with the fight between Cahir and Ciri and Geralt, that is from Cahir's point of view, which I think is the first time we get a Cahir POV in the series. But the majority of Thanedd is actually from Geralt's perspective after everything has happened. And he's basically just like running to find Ciri and Yennefer, and people are just telling him stuff along the way. Obviously, it's such a critical scene and event in the books and in the history of the continent, as I said. But it's in my head, like, if this scene was happening in a video game, the majority of the chapter is literally Geralt running up a hill as people are shouting things at him and telling him what else has happened. And then he just keeps going. Like, I feel like if it was adapted faithfully to the books, with the exception of like him fighting a couple of Redanian soldiers, it's just people yelling things at him as he like stops to help this person or stops to catch like somebody falling from a window and that's it. And he just keeps running and running and running. I can picture it in my head, and it's quite boring, like if you were to adapt that faithfully to screen. So I do appreciate that, you know, even with what they did with Sodden, like we are in the action, we're able to see it. I think how successfully that was executed is a different conversation, but I do like that we feel the intensity of the fight throughout the episode and we understand what is going on, and we can see, for example, Tissa's breakdown in real time and the events that actually led to this outbreak of war. So I do like that. And I think that makes us care more as viewers that we got to see this happening and the events that transpired. I do think one of the things that was overlooked or misrepresented, and you kind of hinted at this, Pauline, it felt like the power balance didn't quite make sense between the Scoia'tael and the mages. And I think one of the things that contributed to that, as opposed to the books, was the books, it was really mages fighting mages until the Scoia'tael came in. And so you had a pretty even power struggle. I wonder if like the Scoia'tael was brought in too early, for example. Like I wonder if there should have been more chaotic infighting than just what happened in that little tiny room. Because you had basically a three-way fight between the mages, the northern mages, the Nilfgaardian allied mages, and then all the neutral mages that we got to know in the books who were just trying to keep the peace, and they got killed in the crossfire. So I think that I would have liked to see that as its own separate act before you reveal the Scoia'tael. So I think that could have fixed that power imbalance slightly. And then you kind of have the Scoia'tael devastating everything. I am open to the idea of Ciri not being there, but I think, as you said, Pauline, there is something really nice about like her journey to escape, and that kind of being the driving force that both attracts her to and causes her to enter Tor Lara. I would have liked to see Vilgefortz's actual disfigurement happen in that scene in the tower. I think that's some of my like overall thoughts about some of the changes. Anything else that you guys want to add?
I really wanted to see Kira falling on Geralt.
Yeah.
I missed it.
Yeah, I wonder if that's one of those things that would have worked being translated to screen. Like, I understand that the entire episode is very serious, but The Witcher that we know and love is very kind of comical and self-referential and weird. I wonder if that would have translated to screen, though, because we're with Geralt and stupid things happen to him, and we know that about this character that we know and love. But I wonder if, like, the comic relief would have been weird.
Yes, the series are more serious, serious, more serious than the books. Again, no pun intended.
Yeah. As we come to the end of our discussion, do you guys have any final thoughts on episode 306? Everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face.
It feels like a Hinge episode because you have, again, so many people dying. All the cards are redistributed. And Geralt is in the worst state we've ever seen him. We have no idea where Ciri's going. It's actually a really key, like, everything changes episode. And I think overall it's quite good. Like when you see things separately, I'm not sure how well it lands. And I agree with you, like, repeatedly, I think you mentioned that if we'd had more time with any given like moment, it would have been nice. But yeah, it feels like we're leaving everything in a state of uncertainty.
Yeah. Pauline, any final thoughts on the episode?
I agree with Lucie. It's a very chaotic episode, whereas in the end, everything has changed. I also think there's so many people getting killed off, but you don't have the time to mourn them as there would be nice. So it's very chaotic, very fast-paced, and then at the end you think for yourself, know what, what's happening, and then but it's a fine episode.
Yeah. So I think my final thoughts on this episode, I think we covered, of course, like the pacing and the chaos of the fight and of each scene. I do think with this being the shortest episode, 48 minutes, and I think the longest episode of the season being, I think, 1 hour and 3 or 1 hour and 5, I do think this episode probably would have benefited from another like 5 to 10 minutes in order to ensure everything is well. I imagine they tightened it just to kind of keep the pace steady and to keep the fight steady. But I think like even a couple of seconds here or there to really focus on the characters and of the gravity of the events of this episode would have been great and really driven the point home of what is happening and what these consequences are. As far as the plot of the episode itself goes, I think there were a few interesting choices that could have been changed to make everything land, I think, a little harder. So, for example, bringing the Scoia'tael a little later or even a little earlier in Tissaia and Vilgefortz's conversation and making some of these betrayals really stick. I did appreciate the production and the fighting. I am so thankful that I could actually see what was happening. Because that's such like a big critique for a lot of like fantasy shows and, a lot of modern shows at the moment, that everything is just so dark that unless you have like a high quality TV, like you're not going to see anything. So I do like that they found narrative reasons for us to see what was going on. Really appreciate that. But yeah, I think it was an effective adaptation of what happened at Thanedd. I think we're going to need a little bit more to have a satisfying ending to some of these plot points and to effectively see them through. But as far as the action goes, really interesting in terms of choreography and fighting decisions. But yeah, ready to see more and happy to get back into podcast discussions with the group. So that is it for our show today. Lucie, Pauline, thank you guys so much for joining us for this episode, and thank you to our Hanza for listening. Next episode, join us as we continue our discussion of The Witcher Season 3 with episode 307, Out of the Fire into the Frying Pan.
Thanks for joining us at The Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and complete list of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastandbeauclair.com. Breakfast and Beauclair is created by Alyssa from GoodMorhen. It's hosted by Alyssa. The show is edited by Alyssa and Sherry Guo, with music by Alex Berner. Breakfast and Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City, with Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B., Charlotte from Megaberg Lamrai, The Original Roach, Livy, John of Rivia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate Vitabi Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Miriam of Temeria, Softy, and Lisa C. Special thanks to Lucie and Pauline for joining us for this episode and our international Hanza for their support.